So now we're going to talk about even and odd functions. So let's start with the reminder of what these things are. What are even functions? They're functions where f of x equals f of negative x for all x. So this is sometimes called symmetric about the y-axis. So let's look at an example function. F of x equals x squared plus 2. So this would be a parabola. Vertex at 0, 2, and it goes upwards. So it's symmetric about the y-axis. If I fold it along the y-axis, the two pieces will match up perfectly. So what does odd mean? An odd function is one where f of x equals negative f of negative x for all x. And this is sometimes called symmetric about the origin. So let's look at an example here. An example here would be the function y equals x. So that's the line with slope 1 through the origin. And a way you can see symmetric about the origin is you rotate it 180 degrees and it stays the same. Rotate it about the origin. So why do we even bring up this even and odd function? What does this have to do with our definite integrals? Well, if f is an even function, then we have the following formula. The integral from negative a to a, if your function is even, it's 2 times the integral from 0 to a. And if your function is an odd function, then the integral from negative a to a of your function is going to be 0. So again, if your function is even, then you have this formula that's true. If your function is odd, then the integral is equal to 0. So let's look at an example here of a definite integral. So let's say I want you to evaluate the integral from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2 of the function sine cubed cosine plus sine times cosine. So the first thing we have to do, this is our function f of x. We need to decide if this function is even or if it's odd. So it amounts to plugging in a negative in place of x. So here we get sine cubed of negative x, cosine of negative x, sine of negative x, cosine of negative x. Now, cosine this function is even, and sine, if you look at the graph of that, you'll see that sine is odd. So here, because sine is odd, I'm going to get a negative cubed sine of x. Cosine of negative x is the same thing as cosine of x because cosine is even. You get a negative here, and And cosine of negative x is cosine of x. So you're getting negative sine x, cosine sine cubed x, cosine x, minus sine x, cosine x. Now this isn't equal to the original function, but it is equal to negative of our original function. So what that means is that f of x is odd. So f is an odd function. So I now know that this integral from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2 of this function, sine cubed cosine plus sine times cosine, because this is an odd function, it's equal to 0. So even and odd, knowing whether your function is even or odd can help you compute the integral much faster.